There'll be one later. Bonnie tells me she's not getting any sound, so I turned on the sound. Sorry. So to start again, tonight we're going to discuss an article by Bill Blum, and the title of the article is "Impeachment is Designed for Presidents Like Trump." Okay, and the article appeared in Truth Dig. Can you hear me now, Bonnie? Okay, so she can. Evidently, my sound is just fine now. So let's go to the article and get started. Why am I not at the article? Who knows? Hang on a second. There we go. Okay, so it starts off. It's easy to understand why a majority of House Democrats have finally gone on record to call for an impeachment inquiry of President Donald J. Trump. Not only has he committed the requisite high crimes, okay, and misdemeanors to trigger such an inquiry, but an argument can be made that he's the most corrupt and treacherous commander in chief in modern American history. The stage is set for Congress to act, regardless of how the Senate responds. And Bill Blum goes on. Bearing in mind that impeachable offenses do not have to be crimes in the formal sense, and they may include behavior prior to the target assuming office. Trump's offenses include, but by no means are limited to, committing campaign finance violations by paying hush money to two women with whom he allegedly had extramarital affairs, Karen McDougal and porn star Stormy Daniels. Next, obstructing justice in connection with the investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller, defying congressional subpoenas, using the presidency for personal economic gain. Next, abusing the pardon power to reward political allies, attacking the press and the judiciary, threatening to prosecute political opponents, abusing emergency powers to build his border wall, incarcerating undocumented immigrant children in concentration camps. I might add, thus by violating by U.S. law, international law, and the human rights of the children and their parents. Attempting to strip, attempting to strip millions of Americans of health insurance, by promoting tax reform to benefit the super rich, gutting environmental regulations and pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, refusing to enforce the Voting Rights Act, and curbing the use of federal consent decrees to counter police misconduct. The bill of particulars that can be drafted against Trump is practically limitless. But beyond the specifics, there is a more fundamental reason to insist on impeachment. Trump is a racist and a fascist. Okay. As for he's being a racist, what Blum says is that, okay, if you don't believe he's a racist, either you're extraordinarily gullible, or you're not paying attention, or you don't care, or worse, you're a racist yourself. He also says that Trump has been practicing white supremacism his entirely adult life. In the early 70s, he and his father were successfully sued by the Justice Department for refusing to rent apartments to non whites. 1989, he took out full-page ads in major New York City newspapers urging the death penalty for 5 black and Latino teenagers, the Central Park Five, who were falsely accused of raping a white woman. Okay, to this day, he refuses to acknowledge the 5 teens were innocent, even though they were exonerated by DNA testing, which, as we know, is 99.99999% certain. During the previous administration, Trump was a prime architect of the birther conspiracy, alleging that President Obama was born in Kenya. In December 2015, he called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims who were entering the United States. As president, he implemented a more targeted version of the travel ban, which was initially directed against but seven of uh, um, Muslim nations, and later revised following several adverse federal rulings. And the modified ban was subsequently upheld in a shameless abdication of judicial independence by the Republican dominated Supreme Court. Last month, Trump tweeted that 4 minority Democratic congresswomen, the so called squad, consisting of Omar, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and Tlaib, and Presley, should go back to the totally broken and crime infested countries they came from. All 4 are U.S. citizens, but 3 of them were born here. There's only one, who was born abroad, and that, was Omar. In response to Trump's tweet, John Lewis, Democrat of Georgia, a celebrated veteran of the civil rights movement, said, quote, I know racism when I see it. I know racism when I feel it. And at the highest level of government, there's no room for racism, unquote. To its credit, the House has since passed a resolution condemning Trump's post as racist, but the resolution is non-binding and it is by no means sufficient. In a column for The Intercept, Sean King argued that racism should be considered an impeachable offense. I have to agree. Both the history of impeachment and the gravity of racism as an affront to the nation support King's assertions. As political science professor Peter Irons, the author of, quote, A People's History of the Supreme Court, unquote, has observed in an NBC.com column last week, President Andrew Johnson was impeached at the midpoint of his first and only term precisely because of his racism, specifically his opposition to post-Civil War Reconstruction programs of the federal government. Like Trump today, the rhetoric of Johnson, and the policies brought the, quote, highest office of the President of the United States into contempt, and ridicule and disgrace, unquote. And while Johnson avoided conviction and removal from office by a single vote in the Senate, Irons noted that impeachment left Johnson, quote, crippled and ineffective in his 2 remaining years, in office. The same thing, I might add, should only happen to Donald Trump. Fascism, too, should be considered impeachable. Absolutely. Fascism is absolutely opposed to democracy. And if we value democracy, fascism, too, has to be considered an impeachable offense. That's me and not Blum. Going on with Blum. And lest there be any confusion, Trump is not simply a product or symptom of late capitalism in decline, as even some on the left have argued. Trump actually represents a political disease that is spreading like an antibiotic resistant superbug across the globe. I agree with that too. And we know the disease is fascism. By any standard definition, Trump is a fascist. Trumpism, along with its international analogs, aspires to impose, quote, the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialistic elements of finance capital, unquote, long decried by Marxist thinkers. Trump also fits a definition of fascism offered by Robert Paxton in his classic study, The Anatomy of Fascism. Fascism may be defined as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, uh, by humiliation or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and by purity, in which a mass based party of committed nationalist uh, militants working in an easy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. Certainly sounds like what Trump is doing, doesn't it? Still unconvinced? Consider, as I've written before in this column, okay, Umberto Eco's list of the 14 common factors of fascism. First, the cult of traditionalism, the rejection, okay, of modernism, a cult of action for its own sake, and a distrust, okay, of intellectualism. The view that disagreement, okay, or opposition is treasonous, affair of difference. Fascism is racist by definition. An appeal to a frustrated middle class that is suffering from an economic crisis and feelings of humiliation and fear of the pressure exerted by lower social groups and obsessions with the plots and machinations of the movements identified enemies. Uh, but further, a requirement that the movement's enemies be simultaneously seen as omnipotent and weak, conniving and cowardly. Um, Further, a rejection of pacifism, contempt for weakness, a cult of heroism, hypermasculinity, and homophobia, a selective type of populism relying on chauvinist definitions of the people that the movement claims to represent, heavy usage, okay, of newspeak and an impoverished discourse of elementary syntax and resistance to complex and critical reasoning. All of those describe either Trump or what he's doing, right, or what his administration is doing. Uh, there are many, if not all, these points that will sound familiar, and with good reason. Our president is a fascist, and fascists do not belong in the White House. The reticence of some Democrats to initiate impeachment proceedings is understandable. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the moderates and center right politicians who still control the party are correct when they argue the Senate will never convict and remove Trump. They are worried that a failed impeachment could bolster Trump's popularity, just as impeachment improved the public standing of Bill Clinton. Still, these concerns are likely overblown, and it would appear Pelosi and her fellow centrists have drawn the wrong lessons from the Clinton saga. While it's true that Clinton's approval ratings increased in the aftermath of his impeachment, the effect actually was short lived. Clinton finished his second term, but he left the Oval Office in disgrace. I don't know if I quite agree with that, but anyway. Republicans used the trial against Al Gore in the 2000 election, putting Clinton's vice president on the defensive and forcing him to distance himself from his predecessor. I don't quite remember it in that way. Yes, they used the trial against Al Gore, but the popularity of Bill Clinton was rising at that time, and no one forced Gore to distance himself from Clinton. And to my mind, while condemning what Clinton did in terms of of lying, uh, it seems to me that he would have done well to embrace Clinton as a president who was increasingly popular. Had he done so, I think it would have swung the very few votes that he needed to actually win in 2000. So I don't think anybody forced Gore to distance himself. I think he made a mistake in distancing himself. Okay, but Blum says even accounting for the contested Florida vote tally, Gore lost to an incompetent opponent he should have trounced. Absolutely. And I think he surely would have trounced him if he had embraced Clinton and his record, run on that particular record. Even though I don't think that was a very good record, and I certainly didn't think that it was a very good record at that time. In the eyes of the nation at that time, it was considered a very good record, and Clinton was very very popular. And had he embraced the record of Clinton and his performance as the president, discounting uh, his lying about but some affairs he had, okay, while in the White House, then I think that Gore would have trounced his opponent very clearly. But impeachment should not be evaluated along electoral lines alone, says Blum. It should be viewed as an end in itself, the process by which the Constitution allows federal officials to hold those who have violated the public trust accountable. Should the House vote to impeach Trump, then the Republicans and Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, will be left with two choices, neither of which is likely to boost the reelection chances of Trump. On the one hand, they could vote to dismiss the articles of impeachment that were lodged against Trump, which Senate rules may permit them to do. On the other hand, they could allow the president to be put on trial, permitting all the world to hear the evidence against him. Either prospect scares McConnell and his minions stiff. Dismissing the case against Trump is going to amount to a massive cover up, while a vote of acquittal would make the Republican officials enablers of the racism and fascism that pervade the president's administration. And Blum says the time for worrying is over. It's time to act. Now, while I agree with Blum's his argument here, okay, in general, okay, and I believe that Nancy Pelosi, okay, and the Democrats are being far too risk averse, okay, about that, and in being risk averse, they're actually incurring the risk of people recoiling from them and staying home and causing the Republicans to win more seats than they might have otherwise done. I also believe that there is more to it than Blum has said. Um, 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 it becomes very important in the process of impeachment what it is. Okay, the Democrats are going to impeach him for. If they try to impeach him on obstruction of justice charges that are related to the RussiaGate affair, and if they emphasize that too heavily, I think there are too many people in America, including many people on the Republican side, who don't think there is anything to the RussiaGate affair. It may be the Russians try to have an impact on our elections, but we have not seen any evidence that the impact was either substantial or actually caused the victory of Donald Trump. It is much more probable that his victory was caused by various faults in Hillary Clinton's campaign, which I'm not going to enumerate here tonight, but they're very familiar to us all. I don't think there are very many Americans out there who actually believe that Trump was elected as president of the United States, or that he should be impeached when perhaps an underlying crime was not there. And the lawyers can say, well, whether there's an underlying crime there or not, obstruction of justice is itself a crime. And yes, they can say that, but that's a technical and legal ground on which to impeach a president, and the Republicans can very effectively talk against it. So I'm not saying that should not be one of the particulars in the charge, that I don't think that Democrats should be heavily emphasizing that. Instead, they should be emphasizing the racism, they should be emphasizing the fascism, they should be emphasizing the plans to deprive 20 million more Americans of health care. They should be talking about the crimes at the border. I think Americans care about that. Okay? So that they should do that. Why they impeach him? They should be talking about his serving as president in order to benefit himself. And they need to tie that. They need to tie that issue to the issue of his having done almost nothing in office to benefit the American people at large, and having done things that only deprive parts of the American people of benefits they have had, and other things that actually deliver very generous rewards for their donor support to his donors and to the groups of people they represent. If those issues are the issues that are emphasized in the campaign, then an impeachment campaign and the impeachment proceedings will be much more popular. But at the same time, that is going on, it has to be turned around in order to deliver charges against Trump in terms of the political campaigns for the House and the presidency. And so the impeachment strategy and the impeachment proceedings need to be carried out in concert with the 2020 election campaigns, so that burden must be placed on Trump for continuing to allow the American people to suffer under inadequate health care for the sake of the insurance companies, for failing to do anything to meet the climate crisis, for failing to do anything to respond to the crises of expensive colleges and student debt, for failing to do anything for the poor in our country, and for negotiating a trade deal not implemented yet or finalized yet, which, though it may not be quite as bad as NAFTA was, is still very, very bad in terms of safeguarding the rights of working people here in the United States, rather than safeguarding the privileges our multinational corporations enjoy now, which don't do anything for the people of the United States. So, this is going to be tricky for the Democrats. They have to be careful when they do it. But they have to run a devastating campaign on real issues at the same time, as they are impeaching Trump for fascism, for racism, and for all of the other things that he is guilty of in terms of the violations, okay, of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution from his first day in office, his attempts to enrich his family with his policies coming out of the Oval Office, the kinds of deals he's cut with the Saudis, also the relationships he has with the authoritarian regimes around the world, including the right-wing governments, okay, of Israel. Okay, but in addition, his propping up of all the other authoritarian regimes around the world. It's a terrible foreign policy. He should be impeached for that alone. But of course, that also comes under the heading of fascism. And so, impeaching him for that, we can fill in the reasoning of fascism by pointing to the various alliances he has made and the various aspects of foreign policy that he has supported in brutal fashion, like the bombing, okay, of Yemen. I know that was started by the previous president, but Trump has pursued it with a vengeance. His foreign policy to um, 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 to overthrow the Venezuelan government, simply because, as many administration officials have said, we want control of their oil. We have no right to overturn a regime in another country because we want control of their oil. That is a violation of international law. All his actions in Venezuela are violations of international law. repeated violations, okay, of international law. His propping up of the fascist but government, or at least his propping up of a government that is moving towards fascism, but in Brazil. That's another charge against him. No one should be an American president who will prop up a fascist government in another country. That should be disqualifying. That should be grounds for impeachment by itself. So, I completely agree with the basic proposition of the article. Impeachment was designed for presidents like Donald J. Trump. And it's long past time that we used it for its intended historical purpose, which was for the Congress to act as a check on a runaway and tyrannical president of the United States. And that's exactly what Trump is. He's a fascist, he's a racist, he's a tyrant. And on that note, I'll end this stream. Thank you for coming.